My mom said, Bo, I don't think anyone should get anything. She said, who are they going to give the money to? She said, I think things are moving along pretty well. She said, it's slowly moving, but it is moving. And she said, have anyone thought about paying the white people that died in the Civil War to free you from slavery? And I said, oh, geez, they're not going to want to talk about that one.
No.
So I said, when she thought of that, I said, Mom, you're right. Everyone that's coming in talking about their reparations wasn't even around 150 years ago. They wasn't even around 200 years ago.
The Georgia runoff is officially here, and I am on the edge of my seat. Herschel Walker is truly digging a hole for himself at every single turn, and it just doesn't seem to matter for Republicans. Shocker. That was Walker speaking on the topic of reparations, making a case for descendants of white Civil War soldiers getting reparations for freeing enslaved Black folks. Now, some of you may be thinking, what? Yeah, me too. The way conservatives try to subvert and avoid the conversation about reparations reminds me of that meme from The Matrix where Neo dodges all of the bullets by bending backwards. The whataboutisms that they just love to interject with are never ending. And of course, the implications of what he's saying here is that the descendants of enslaved Black folks don't deserve reparations, but somehow the descendants of white soldiers do. We can't ignore the ties here between him being a conservative Republican and the same talking points that conservative news channels like Fox News spew all of the time. Fox News loves to remind everybody that even if we did figure out who actually gets owed reparations, we just can't seem to afford it. And this was most recently reiterated when recently the news came out about Gavin Newsom in California pushing a bill for reparations in the state.
Newsom's kicking it up a notch. He wants to launch the most expensive reparations plan in American history. Over $500 billion, $250,000 for any Black person whose ancestor faced housing discrimination. That's a lot of people. And it's not just money for housing discrimination. Newsom's reparation task force wants to hand out more cash for what they call mass incarceration, unjust property seizures, devaluation of Black businesses, and access to health care. It sounds like this is going to end up costing more than Build Back Better, just a wee bit. This isn't just free money. It's a fortune, $250,000 handout per person. Now, I'm willing to listen to people who believe Black Americans are owed something from a country that enslaved their ancestors. I'm not sure I agree with it, but I'm willing to listen.
Did you hear that? He said handouts. What Waters is implicating here is that reparations is an undeserved and expensive handout that America just can't seem to afford. And aside from the it's too expensive theory and we just can't seem to afford it, 2 months ago, they tried making the case that it's actually other countries who are currently enslaving folks, and those are the people that we should be focusing on, not Americans. What happened to America first, guys?
The truth is history is complex, and the people involved in the grave sin of both racism and slavery, enslavement of people, that's going on today, ladies and gentlemen, all over the world, in places like China, in parts of Northern Korea, and places scattered elsewhere. We need to hear more about that, the contemporary examples of it, and not keep rooting through the annals of history and trying to dig up reparations for people in the present day. I mean, I often say my people were making paella and crushing grapes when this happened. We weren't here. So we were more enslaved than we weren't part of this. But when you look at what happened, it's always a broken history, but there are good points to it and bad points. And you've got to take the whole of history and move on. We've progressed, and now we're surrounded by our brothers and sisters, and we're all one community. That's what we should have been, but we found that. Celebrate that. Let's move on together.
Yeah. Saying things like history is complicated and we should just all move on is a fairly convenient way of bypassing responsibility. But again, that's what conservatives are experts in. And that is pretty on brand for conservatives and Republicans, especially Walker. In 2021, he actually spoke against a bill calling for reparations in Congress. In his statement, he said, reparations teach separation. Slavery ended over 130 years ago. How can a father ask his son to spend prison time for a crime he committed? Yeah, I don't know how equating prison time to paying reparations that comes out of taxes that are already paid. I don't know how they're equivalent, but somehow that made sense to him. And he didn't stop there. He also said, reparations, where does the money come from? Does it come from all the other races except the Black taxpayers? Who is Black? What percentage of Black must you be to receive reparations? Do you go to 23andMe or a DNA test to determine the percentage of Blackness? Oh my God. Walker is taking a page out of the conservative playbook here that they actually used in the Civil War. So this actually isn't anything new. After President Lincoln was murdered, the reparations bill that we know as the 7 Acres and a Mule bill was actually replaced with one that paid plantation owners reparations for their loss of income. You know, because white people no longer having free labor was actually harmful to them and not the people that they violently enslaved. And America somehow justified paying all of that money over to plantation owners. So somehow we just can't figure out how to pay back the descendants of the people who actually deserve to be paid. And as time passes, that same conservative playbook has only been refined to conveniently elusive excuses. So this Georgia runoff comes down to 2 things: progression and stagnation. And I truly am at the edge of my seat to see which direction the state decides to go in. And it is uncomfortably close. But it looks like Democrats might actually pull this one off. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok. I'm Constanza Eliana for Rebel HQ.